it's a deal that suits both parties. I mean, Honda are getting one of the top 3 riders in the world, I think, without question. And Quartararo is getting a factory that is back on the up that can continue to pay his way through private jets and Lamborghinis.
Hello, welcome to Paddock Pass podcast, and on today's podcast we're previewing the Sepang test. We've also got a lot of questions coming in from our Patreon supporters on what we can expect over the course of the next few days in Malaysia. But I think we've obviously got to kick things off, Neil Morrison, with the big news of this week in MotoGP, and Fabio Quartararo signs for Honda, Jorge Martin goes to Yamaha. It all looks like it's done deal whenever you listen to what we've seen on motorsport.com from Yuri, and Yuri's always very well placed, so no real reason to think that this isn't the case.
Yeah, exactly, Steve. Who has been the winner of the Shakedown test? It has been Uri Pujamont of motorsport.com. Quite impressive haul of news yesterday. Massive news. We haven't heard any confirmation yet. We're recording this on the Friday morning, just before while the Shakedown test is still ongoing. No confirmation from either Yamaha or Honda that these things
Honda haven't had their 2026 launch yet.
Exactly, yeah. Here we are talking about 2027, but yeah, it does look as though Fabio Quartararo is making a sensational switch to Honda. Jorge Martin, has finally found a way out of Aprilia. It does seem as though the news around Pedro Acosta is gathering kind of steam that he will be going to the factory Ducati team. So, Thursday was just a whirlwind day, one of those kind of crazy news days where it just keeps piling on top of each other. And you think, please stop, give us breathing space.
It was interesting, actually, because one of the questions Adam asked last week was how the media is going to work in the future. And Adam, we're all just going to copy Yuri. That seems to be the easiest solution.
I just wanted to react to Neil there, Steve, because maybe Aprilia found a way away from Jorge Martin. So that could also be a way of looking at it.
Yes.
But as Neil mentioned, it's everything is far from being confirmed, although you would imagine things will happen in the next couple of weeks and press releases will be flying, because it does depend on certain contracts and when riders have clauses for first refusals, announcements and whatever else. So that might dictate some of the timelines on this thing. But I don't know what's the most interesting one, because for me the Quartararo news is kind of sensational, I want to say. I mean, he's been with Yamaha since 2019. Maybe this is a case of jumping out the frying pan into maybe a saucepan. I don't know.
Does the saucepan have boiling water, or is it simmering?
Well, a frying pan has boiling fat, and now you're sort of jumping into.
That seems worse than boiling water, though, in fairness.
What's that name of the rich duck in Donald Duck who keeps on diving into a pot of gold? Scrooge McDuck. Yes, right. Well, it's more like that, where he's diving out of the frying pan and into a great big swimming pool full of money. He's diving out of a swimming pool full of money as well. So
but a deeper swimming pool of money now, potentially, Dave.
Possibly, yeah. But I mean, I think going to Honda, I was slightly surprised. I thought he was going to go to Ducati because we'd heard lots and lots about that he really wanted to be in Ducati. Ducati were interested in him. We know that Ducati have tried to take it from Yamaha before at least once, I think the previous contract cycle. There's also talk that there might have been a pre-contract. But yeah, going to Honda, that's a good bike now. It's not far off. And we have a new era coming up, the 850s. They're building an 850, which is going to be a lot less about the rear tire. The Pirellis are completely different. They're going to be building completely different bikes. Ride height devices are gone. Aerodynamics are going to be different. All of Ducati's weapons are being taken away. It doesn't mean that Ducati won't build a good bike, but it'll level the playing field a bit. And I just want to say this. Yesterday really turned 2026 into the least anticipated MotoGP season ever, because we all want it to be over and find out what happens in 2027.
Yeah, just get it all done and dusted as soon as possible.
Give Mark the trophy. Get it done and dusted. Get on with the exciting stuff.
Exactly. Yeah, bring the 850s to Thailand and get rid of these 1000s already.
Oh man. Oh god. Please. I think I need a moment.
Yeah. I mean, it is interesting. Quartararo was saying throughout the end of last year that his aim is to be on a winning bike in 2027. I think Dave's right. You're not looking at Honda right now as potentially a winning bike, but in 2027, when you consider just the fact that they've got their act together in the last year and a half, they've got a really good test team. They've got a really pimped out schedule for testing the 850 that's already on track at the end of last year. You know, there's reports that they've kind of booked out Sepang circuit throughout this year. I think Dave heard this yesterday that basically they're going to be testing their 850 just non-stop throughout the year. And obviously they can probably match Yamaha in terms of, you know, salary. Maybe they're not quite matching it. What was it, 12 million a year, I think, that Yamaha are currently paying Quartararo. But he can also look at a pretty hefty payday when he goes to Honda as well. And I think it's a deal that suits both parties. I mean, Honda are getting one of the top 3 riders in the world, I think, without question. And Quartararo is getting a factory that is back on the up that can continue to pay his way through private jets and Lamborghinis.
I mean, we're not surprised that Quartararo is the first to make, well, in news about Quartararo is the first to emerge. But I'm surprised a little bit because obviously Marc Marquez is at the top of the tree. And if you assume that Pedro Acosta is going to go to Ducati, which, you know, we don't know for sure yet, then, you know, if Marc does turn around and say, actually, my shoulder feels crap, I feel crap, I don't want to be doing years more of MotoGP, then Ducati maybe have to start hustling and thinking, well, Pecco, we love you, really, come back. But I just wanted to make a point about Quartararo because undoubtedly it's a fascinating move for him. But from HRC's point of view, I mean, they're getting one of the most talented riders that we've seen in MotoGP in the last sort of decade. But I think Fabio's only sort of Achilles heel is maybe his development prowess. I mean, if Honda still need to make the final steps in terms of their technical package, Fabio hasn't really shown too much acumen on that side of it because Yamaha just, haven't really improved that much with the M1. Of course, you could say there's all sorts of mitigating factors, such as the M1 coming to the end of its development cycle, the resources that Yamaha had, the changes to the personnel that they've had. But I still think, of all the riders on the grid, do you look at Quartararo as like the man to really sort of drag the project into its next phase of competitiveness outside from results and, as we know, riding the thing to 10/10ths?
Luca Marini.
I do think, though, to a big extent, that riders are overthought about in terms of being able to lead development. I don't think engineers listen to them. I don't think Gigi Dall'Igna has ever said to a rider, I'm going to let you design this bike, I'm going to let you make these big decisions. And I think that ultimately that's the case going forward for a lot of manufacturers, especially now. And at Honda, when you've got Romano in there, a GT disciple, I can't believe that he's spending that much time caring too much about what any of his riders really think about the bike. They want to be able to give feedback that says certain things within the parameters that they're developing, but I don't think that the rider really plays that big of a role. I think that was the case all the way back, even when you look at when Rossi moved to Yamaha. I think that they were able to get that bike to work, but I don't think it was because suddenly they listened to Rossi from a development perspective. I think maybe you have it where at that stage someone like Jerry Burgess or the engineers were able to get the bike into a setting window, and that was the important thing. So
Kurosawa turned up with a new engine concept that he wanted to try and a new bike, and Rossi said, This is what we need. I know it's slower than the other one, but this is the one that we need. So what he did was identify the correct direction, which the engineers had set out. That's what a rider does. Is says, yeah, no, I like this. It works. And this isn't working. And the engineer will say, all right, yeah, well, that might not be working, but we can make up for it somewhere else.
Yeah, I always think that Ernie Marinelli's quote was the best quote for me about riders and test riders. Troy Bayliss was the best test rider Ducati ever had because something was only faster and then it was better. If it wasn't faster, it was worse. And Bayliss was just kind of, it's my job to make whatever is the fastest bike actually get around the track well. And I think that's what's, for me, hasn't changed in 25 years. But we do have quite a few questions that came in from our Patreon supporters as well. One of them was actually just about the Jorge Martin news. We had quite a few, actually. But Sfor Decker was asking us just what is Jorge thinking? Are the relations between Aprilia and Martin that bad? We've obviously covered this already in terms of that relationship. But what was interesting from the question was, will Jorge do better on a 2027 Aprilia than a 2027 Yamaha?
I mean, it's it's quite interesting. You have to say that Jorge pulled off a marvelous performance at the Aprilia launch in that he stated that, he didn't mention at all that he wasn't going to be missing from the Sepang test, which he is as a rider. And he also hinted that he would be more than happy to stay with Aprilia in 2020-27, when that clearly couldn't be further from the truth. I mean, when you sort of weigh up what he said at the team presentation, it's a bit of a surprise. When you sort of look at the situation generally and what happened, after 6 rounds of last year, then it's not a surprise at all. What is he thinking? I mean, he's thinking that this bike is cursed, that I've had nothing but problems with the RSGP, that I'm now no longer the number one rider in this factory when I signed, and that I probably am going to have to take a bit of a pay cut if I want to stay at Aprilia. I'm probably taking an inferior salary to Marco Bezzecchi, which I think is something that he wouldn't be so invested in. I mean, this is just speculation on my part, but I think these are all likely causes. And then you have Yamaha, who, okay, they're the fifth manufacturer of MotoGP at the moment, but they do have an exciting new project. They are fully behind developing this V4, and they can offer, a serious chunk of wedge. And, I don't think Martin has ever in his career yet had a massive kind of statement contract. He's obviously had a very good contract. He's a multimillionaire, but he's not ever kind of earned on the same level that, Marc Marquez or Fabio Quartararo, or probably even Pecco Bagnaia has done in the past. So, this is his chance to kind of make up in that regard.
I think one of the crucial factors, or details rather, is the fact that, Martin is more likely to be heading back to Pramac, obviously where he won the World Championship in 2024. Maybe that's something he needs for his mental state or his confidence or something else. He's going to be riding a Yamaha from the confines of a team where he excelled in his career to date. So that's maybe just another factor in part of explaining this transfer.
Why do you think he's going to go to Pramac? I don't think he is. I think it's not just that, Jorge Martin wants out of Aprilia. It's also that Yamaha don't have a project right now, a bike right now, which can attract a top rider. The reason the Fabio Quartararo is going to Honda is because the Honda is really good. And it looks like it can actually win races with the right rider on it. That's why Honda are waving around all of this money. Yamaha don't have that bike. It's very much a development project. So they're sort of condemned to each other because Jorge Martin is slightly damaged goods because of everything that happened last year. The Yamaha is damaged goods because it's they're right in the middle of this building process. So there is a lot still to do, and I don't think they had a lot of other. I don't think either of them had a lot of other options.
Yeah, I think that all sounds very fair, David. And we covered this quite a bit on patreon.com/Paddock Pass podcast yesterday when we started to see the news emerging. And we've got that pod available for all of our Patreon supporters. So check that out as well.
Yeah, I think it's probably just worth mentioning that it wasn't just motorsport.com yesterday that was the website to be. We also saw on Diario AS, Mela Chercoles, who is another respected and usually pretty reliable Spanish journalist, reporting that the Acosta to Ducati thing is very much in play, and that this is kind of one of the things that has set the whole thing off. That Acosta, I think, was originally the top name on the shopping list of Honda, and whenever they found out that he was intent on Ducati and a place alongside Marc Marquez, then they moved quickly to try and sign the rider that was next on their shopping list, Fabio Quartararo. And, we've been hearing this for a couple of weeks now, that there was maybe some kind of agreement in place between both Pedro and Ducati, during the off-season, signed maybe sometime toward the end of last year. Another just sensational bit of news if it indeed is true. And you have to say,
it a good move, Neil?
You have to admire the sort of the brass on the young lad. Thinking I want to measure myself against the best, maybe the best that there's ever been. Is it a good move for Acosta?
Well for every single teammate that Marquez has had, right?
Exactly. Yeah, it does come with a massive caveat. But you could look at every single one of those team members, and none of them were kind of coming up against Marc with this kind of age dynamic and stage of career dynamic. Like Marc is probably in the last 3-4 years of his career, maybe 5 or 6, we don't know. But
maybe
Acosta,
2.
or maybe 2. But Acosta is very much, this is the start of the Pedro Acosta era, potentially. I'm sure that's how he sees it anyway. And yeah, he's not one to shy away from a challenge, but I think you have to admire.
Yeah, every superstar does eventually get aged out, and Mark's injuries probably bring that age down a little bit for him as well. And when you look at it on CVs, Pedro's probably the best rider that Mark will go up against as well as a teammate. Obviously, Pecco's got his 2 world championships, had his time within Ducati already, but I think on the basis of what we saw last year, we can see that Mark has obviously destroyed him, and then you move on to the next one. And Mark's going to enjoy that challenge as well. But obviously, the season kicks off with the Sepang test. The Shakedown test is already going on. And David, that led us to a question we had from Bill Walker. And it's, for one thing, how did we manage to get you out to Sepang to travel all that distance? But I think a far more important question would be, why aren't you at the Shakedown, Dave?
Because they don't really let you at the Shakedown. You get to go in the paddock and you get to stand at the side of the track, which could also be useful. But I mean, look, the Shakedown it started literally as that. It was literally the test riders rolling all of the bikes which have been built out onto the track, putting laps on, making sure it works, making sure things don't explode, making sure that things don't fall off. It's expanded a little bit now. We've got Yamaha riding, we've got the rookies riding, but you're not allowed to really sort of you're not allowed to speak to riders. You're not allowed in the media center. I'm too old to be dealing with tropical Malaysian heat all day. So I'm perfectly happy to bide my time and go there once I go there for the test prop.
Yeah, that sounds fair enough. And Adam, we had a question in from Marcus and also another Adam Cole, and they were asking, what can we really take away from the test? And is this the barometer of what we can expect for the season, or is it literally just the starting point?
Hello, Marcus. Hello, Adam. Great name. The question about
Sounded very Donald there.
The question about sort of getting Dave to Sepang is kind of the wrong way round. It's a case of how do we stop him? I mean, he's already talked about standing trackside in ridiculous tropical heat, but this is the fundamental date on Dave's MotoGP calendar. So it's and regular listeners to the podcast will know that we try to be as comprehensive as we can from this one. But I'm puzzled, Steve, as to why Dave's so excited this year, because 2026 MotoGP bikes, I mean, really, what are we going to get? Maybe a little tweak to ride height devices that you won't be able to see in pit lane, Dave. Maybe there's going to be a slightly different curvature of the aero profile. That's it.
No, you really can. I mean, you can see quite a lot of the ride height devices, and that's interesting. We know that Ducati are doing this. We know that this is what they're focusing on. You've already seen the new Aero, which is absolutely massive, which is bad news for Pecco Bagnaia, but more about that later. And yeah, no, you can see quite a lot. But yes, yes, it's no secret. Brolon 2027.
Well, let's not forget this is the first of only 2 tests, just to finish off answering the question from the patrons. And, it can be a bit of a misleader. It also can be quite revealing to brands that have struggled at Sepang. Testing conditions can either be horrendous with very hot temperatures in the morning followed by rain in the afternoon, or the track is going to be extremely grippy. The Shakedown boys, in terms of the test riders and other riders, have been sort of laying down rubber already. But I think the distinguishing factor of 2026 is that it's going to be an indicator for brands that are trying to split their resources between this year's bikes, this year's championship, and also what they have to do for 2027. Gigi Dall'Igna, when I interviewed him in Madonna di Campiglio a couple of weeks ago, said everything hinges on those couple of days for us, because if things are looking good, then we can focus more on the 850. He said if we have problems at Sepang, then we're going to have to devote more time, more attention, more energy to getting the bike, the GB26, ready to try and defend the stats that they have. What was it, 6 times constructors champions, 3 different world champions in the last 4 years. So the laps that we see and the times and the efforts, and I hope Dave's going to be there with his hat pulled firmly tight, then that will sort of maybe give us a bit of a lead into how MotoGP will be for the first 5 or 6 races at least.
I think the Shakedown, just to go back to the Patreon question from Marcus and Adam, it's also sort of a decent indicator just what level some of the rookies are at. I remember the Shakedown test 2 years ago. I think Pedro Acosta topped the final day of that, and was down lapping in the 1:58. And pretty much everyone related to MotoGP was just thinking, okay, third day in a MotoGP bike at Sepang, and he's doing those kind of lap times. Like, that is seriously impressive. And then Pedro obviously went on to light up the first 5-6 races of the 2024 campaign, and what was on the podium in just a second race. So yeah, I think that is another decent thing to watch out for, because we have both Toprak and Diogo Moreira on track at the moment. Toprak's times have been quite impressive so far. We'll probably come on to this a bit more when we get to the Yamaha section of the pod. Maybe not quite as outstanding and eye-catching as Acosta's, but then you always, I think, with anything that Toprak does this year, you have to kind of add in that it's a new bike still that he's developing. And new tires for him as well, yeah. Although there were new tires for Acosta back in 2024 as well, Dave. But yeah, I get your point.
Yeah, I always think that's one of the things that for Toprak this year is probably a little bit overplayed, because for any Moto2 rider, they've had to adapt from Pirellis in recent years or Dunlops in the past. But Dave, I'll come to you first about the Sepang test. Which manufacturer do you want to start with? Do you want to start with the one that probably has the least amount of work to do, or the one that has the most amount of work to do?
I'd like to hear you define which of those two you think is which.
Well, we'll just go with Yamaha then, Dave, because it's the one that's got the most to do. They've got a brand new bike. And it actually lends us into one of the questions we had as well, with Lou was asking us, since Yamaha have their concession status, what will they test and what should they test with their new bike?
Yes, it's tricky. Also, because they lose their concession sets for the 850, so everyone will have pretty much the same amount of testing time with the 850. What they need to, and they can't afford to put too many resources into the V4, but they need to do some really, really fundamental stuff. They really need people lapping as much as possible, finding the right balance of the bike, finding the right weight distribution, the right geometry, all the rest of it for the way that you build a V4. Yamaha do not know how to build a V4 in the way that the other manufacturers do, because they've got decades of experience by now. This is Yamaha's first. It's literally their first 4-stroke V4 bike since, I think, the VMAX in the late 80s, early 90s. So they have so much. They have so much to learn. It's going to be interesting to see how quickly they can do. They really just need to have good riders on it as much as possible. They do have. Andrea Dovizioso. Sorry, Neil, cover your ears. But I think Andrea Dovizioso is a little bit slow now.
Burn him at the stake.
But he is extremely analytical and can understands how to make a really fast motorbike. Augusto Fernandez is pushing and trying to. He's still hungry. He really wants to come back, and so that means he's pushing his speed. But they just need to put the riders on it as much as possible. I suspect that Jack Miller is going to be spending an awful lot of time testing in between rounds, just to give them the feedback that they need, because obviously Fabio is going to be less interested in making the Yamaha faster if he's on the way out. But yeah, I think also that Yamaha is going to be the bike which changes most, because, like I said, there's so much that they still have to learn, and a lot of these lessons will also go into their 850.
Yeah, I think that's all very fair. And Neil, we actually had a question in from Joe Colombo. You mentioned Toprak earlier on, and Joe's question is, how afraid is the MotoGP paddock that a superbike rider comes in and is fast straight away? Just before this, I think it's been quite funny that a lot of the things that we've seen on social about Toprak have been, he's back in the Grand Prix paddock, and there's a lot of pictures of him as a Red Bull rookie that's been doing the rounds. But I think obviously no one's looking back to 12 years ago for Toprak as a Grand Prix prospect from then.
Yeah, I don't think people are afraid. I think people are hopeful, because I would like to see this switch made more often. And I think there's no question of Toprak's level. I mean, I'm speaking from a personal point of view, but I think it's a view that's shared across many of the journalists and other media members that I've spoken to. There is a real hope that Toprak can do something, because we know the talent that he has, and it would just be a wonderful story. A rider coming through quite a different route compared to a lot of his contemporaries now. Maybe there are lots of riders that are quite afraid of Toprak, because they know just what he can do on a bike, having watched him in World Superbike get 3 titles. But I wouldn't say that people are like, oh, we want the World Superbike rider to fail. I don't think that is that's certainly not the viewpoint that I pick up on.
Yeah, Lynn Jarvis is gone now.
Yeah, I don't think that's the feeling at all. I just hope that he gets a fair shot. At that, I mean, he avoids injury. He's able to sort of make some progression. He doesn't become, the target of somebody in the MotoGP field. I mean, if you think of like poor sort of Miguel Oliveira, his sort of predecessor, Miguel just went through a spate of crashes and incidents where he just didn't really get the rub of the green. And I really would like to see Toprak make an imprint in the result sheets, because there are other Superbike riders. I mean, Jonathan Ray, had 2 fantastic outings on the Repsol Honda, and, arguably should have had another window of opportunity in GP racing as well. And even like Eugene Laverty, I mean, he came back into MotoGP. It's a shame he didn't have a more competitive bike, apart from that one season where he was riding the Ducati for the Aspar team. So I think there's expectations. I just hope that the fucking stoppie just doesn't appear too much. I mean, yeah, do it for the first couple of races, do the big social media thing, and then nip it in the bud, Toprak, find something else.
Very harsh, Ed. Caustic comment, as was to be expected. Just looking at the times, I mean, we're recording this Friday morning, so we are midway through day 2 of the Shakedown test, or we're actually approaching the end of day 2. But the times as of just quickly scans down. As of 4:30 in the afternoon. I mean, the Yamahas are not a million miles away. Paul Espargaro has set the fastest time of the day so far, 57.9. Quartararo just under half a second off that time, and Toprak less than a second off that time, which I think is it's pretty positive and quite heartening. Although, obviously the single lap doesn't quite tell the full story, as we saw with, Augusto Fernandez in some of his wildcard appearances at the end of last year, most memorably of all in Misano, where the one lap seemed to be almost the kind of the least of their worries. It was more, how the bike performed over a longer succession of laps.
I think I disagree slightly in that I think it is concerning that Fabio Quartararo is half a second behind Pol Espargaro. Fabio Quartararo, Pol Espargaro is a really great rider, but Fabio Quartararo is a bit special. And if he's on that Yamaha, that's going to be a concern, especially is generally Sepang, there's a lot of grip at Sepang, and especially during the test. And we saw this last year where the amount of grip on track at Sepang really certainly caught Yamaha out, because Yamaha looked really, really quick, and then they ended up being not quite so quick. But I mean, the way that you compare, you have to compare people on the same bike, and for Toprak to be 4/10 behind Fabio Quartararo and ahead of Jack Miller, that I think is really, really good news and really, really positive, and a sign that it's going to be fun and interesting and fast.
Yeah. Paul showed last year that he's still a top level MotoGP rider. Maybe not a race winner, but still one of the top riders in the world, I think. So I wouldn't say that's a million miles away. And it sort of brings back what Maya Marigali said at the Yamaha team launch. When was that? 2 weeks ago in Jakarta, when he was saying, the first part of the season is basically just about us understanding what is going on with this bike. And then we're expecting, Fabio, Rins, Toprak and Miller to kind of kick on in part 2 of the season. So I think, we shouldn't be setting the bar too high for the Sepang test. And, I think if they are within a second of the top times, then that is maybe a promising start. But obviously one of the things about the Shakedown is so difficult because we don't actually have access to the riders. No one's doing debriefs, no one's doing media interviews. So, you don't really know what the riders are working on. Did this lap time come at the end of a long run, et cetera, et cetera. So, I think we'll have a much better idea when the official test kicks off next week.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And we'll move on to Aprilia next, because we had a couple of questions in about them as well. Yanni was asking just how much does this hurt Jorge Martin to miss the test, and how much further does he fall behind the curve by not having the Sepang test. So, Adam, what do you think about that?
Yeah, massively. It goes without saying. And I think we've said on previous podcasts as well that the Sepang test and the sheer mileage, not just to get a grip on new components, but also just to sort of work on further refining, the package that you had from the Valencia test. It's really critical. And, you only have Buriram, which is another 2 days in Thailand, one of which, if you have good weather and conditions are great, are spent towards working on race setup for the first GP. So time is just absolutely fundamental here for setup. And Martin, again, is right behind sort of the 8 ball. He's under pressure. And Aprilia, poor Lorenzo Savadora, I mean, he must be the hardest working test rider in MotoGP history. He's now having to sort of fill in again and try to sort of give this project some coherency. And Marco Bezzecchi is, came in under the radar, you could say, less pressure. He was the guy who was going to be riding next to the reigning world champion last year. Now he's pretty much the point man. And Raul Fernandez, you have to say, and Ayagu are really going to have more eyes and more scrutiny on them because Aprilia need to accumulate some information quick.
Eyes on eye.
Indeed. Eyes open.
This has gone terrible. We had another question. VJ was asking actually about Dave's favorite rider, Raul Fernandez, and the question is: will Raul crash again at this test and ruin another preseason for himself?
Fan as well, then, of Raul.
Yeah, you would put money on it, but you would also hope, because he did seem to mature a lot last year. I think last year was a really crucial year for Raul, and he did seem to make some progress in thinking a little bit more. So hopefully he will be able to contain himself for the first day. Hopefully David Abrivio will at some point just take the keys away and stop him from going out on his last run, to stop him from hurting himself.
His first run.
Can I ask you a question about Raul then as well? Because it's quite interesting for me with him, because when you look at last season, we all see the race victory in Phillip Island and you think, oh, he had a really good season. He finished top 10 in the championship. But it was only really 3 or 4 rounds where he scored a lot of points. There was a lot of rounds where he was only scoring a couple of points and this, that, and the other. Which Raul are we actually going to get this year? Because we know that his high marks are always really good. We saw that in Moto2 whenever he was so impressive. But we know that his floor is so low at times as well.
No, Steve, I think Dave nailed it on there by saying the progression that you could see, because the year didn't start well in 2025, but then he kind of actually matured. He made some evolution as a MotoGP rider. And I think we could all agree he arrived to the point that we expected years ago when he bounced out of Moto2 with such potential. And in fact, one of the takeaways for me from the Valencia test, when we're all shivering, freezing cold there, waiting for the last rider debriefs of the day to finish outside the broadcaster set, was the look on Raul's face of like almost utter disgust, because, he had been given nothing new to test. And he was very careful with his words, but he was kind of very unimpressed that after the season he had, and obviously the race he had at Valencia, that Aprilia hadn't really given him anything new. So I wonder what kind of package he's going to get in Sepang. I mean, Aprilia really going to show their faith in him? Are they going to give him some brand new specs, the same as Bezzecchi and Savadori, you could say? Or, is he still going to be kind of marginalized into that corner where they don't quite believe in him?
But I think, I can't remember if it was Rivola or Sterlachini, the technical director, who said, and Savadori said, look, I've got to go out early because I've got 8 bikes to prepare. They're going to be 8 identical bikes, 8 new bikes. And there isn't a huge amount of difference. The engine isn't different, obviously, because of the engine freeze. The frame looks a bit different there. I've got some different aero. So he is going to start off on the at the same level as everyone else. And then it is just a trick of not falling off.
I'm just come back to Raul, that Adam said that, standing in front of all the media, he saw a matured MotoGP rider, and it was the look of disgust that gave him that. Obviously, Neil, that was looking down at all the media and realizing that he shouldn't have to talk to us, and that's the true sign of a factory Grand Prix rider.
Most riders have a look of disgust when they have to, glance towards the media and the collection of characters that we are.
But just about Aprilia then, Neil, obviously we saw at the end of last season, it was probably the most user-friendly bike on the grid. We saw a lot of riders able to be competitive on it. They don't need to reinvent anything for Sepang. But they are under pressure as well, because obviously when Mark comes back to start the season, the expectation is he's going to be able to win races. He's going to be at the front. He's going to do all the things that he has been doing for last year. But for Aprilia, they need to be able to make that step as well, to be able to show that they weren't only winning races because Mark wasn't there.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the challenge. And that's going to be the difficult thing for Aprilia this year, because essentially, on the back of last year, the only way that they can improve is really by fighting for the championship. But do we say with great hope in our hearts that they will be doing that? I mean, Rivola and Bezzecchi were both quite cautious in stating that they would actually be challenging Mark full time. Yeah, it's an interesting one. I mean, yeah, they don't need to reinvent the wheel. We saw at the team presentation, like, fairly different and revised aero on the bike. I think electronics was another area where they were looking to make decent strides over the off season. They had a really solid base, probably the best base that they've had in MotoGP until now. The situation with Martin isn't ideal, but then Martin was missing through all preseason last year. Bezzecchi was new to the bike, and we had a situation where Aigura was fighting for the podium at the first race. So, I don't think it's necessarily the end of the world that, Savadori is having to fill in once again. I think Aprilia has shown over the last 12 months that even if the rider lineup isn't kind of firing at full level, and of course, Raul Fernandez missed all of preseason last year as well, or he missed the first test anyway.
A couple of laps in though.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, give him credit for that. I think Aprilia has shown that they are quite sort of bulletproof when it comes to. Obviously, you don't want to be losing Bezzecchi. He's the absolute key, but it is a solid lineup, and it is going to be interesting to see how they manage these expectations this year.
In terms of the bike, they fixed most of their problems last year. They really took a real advantage of Jorge Martin's absence by letting Savadori work on the electronics, sort the engine character out. So the engine itself is smooth, rideable. That made a big step. The next big step was with the tail aero to make the bike much more stable in braking, which was their other biggest issue. So they start off from a really, really solid base. Now it's just refining. They don't have a lot of work to do.
And the bike starts well as well now.
Yeah.
We had a few questions in as well, just about how teams are going to strategize their development through the course of this year. Honda's actually a good one to cue this up to, because how do you focus on improving a bike that did make a step last year while also working on 2027? Will Honda look at it and say, we've signed Fabio, that's where the focus has to be? Or what are Honda going to do during the course of the Sepang and Buriram test day?
I'll come back to Honda, because KTM's Pit Byra was very interesting about that. He got asked about this. Is there anything you can learn from the 1000 that you can put into the 850 development? And how do you balance that development strategy? And he said, basically, there's not going to be any major changes. We're not going to start bringing, a new frame for the 1000cc. The bike is going to be more or less what it is, but we'll refine it. And if we think we've got something which can help a bit, we shall bring that. But a lot of the focus is going to be on the 850. And I think that's going to be the same for Honda. I think Honda also have the advantage of having Taka Nakagami concentrating on the 850. Aleix Espargaro is really, really fast and going to be able to help to push those last parts of the 1000 forward. Honda itself, the bike itself was pretty well sorted. Its biggest problem in 23-24 was corner entry. They fixed that. It's much more stable. They're still looking for rear grip and for engine character. They do get to bring a new engine for this year, but once they've sorted that engine out, then that's going to be it for this year, because they've moved up from category D to category C in concessions. Which means they're not going to be able to test with their permanent riders, and it also means that the engine is frozen for the entire year. So I think they're going to be spending this test working especially on engine character to sort that out. They have to get it right at this test, basically. But again, apart from that, they don't have a lot. They don't have a lot to do. The engine the bike was really fast. It turned well. It braked well. It tended to spin on corner exit. It didn't have the rear grip that it really needed. that's something you can fix with balance, with a little bit of engine character, with a bit of electronics. I think electronics is going to be a really, really important focus for them.
Neil, obviously for Honda as well, they've got a rookie coming in, and Moreira is going to be an interesting rider to see his progress over the course of this test, and the Shakedown test as well helps him.
Exactly. You'll have 3 days at the Shakedown to prepare for it. I mean, you don't want to be jumping on the bandwagon and getting on someone's back early doors, but I would say his times haven't been particularly eye-catching. I mentioned those times as they stand currently toward the end of day 2, and he is 2 seconds off the quickest time, which is maybe some way off some of the better rookie performances that we've seen in MotoGP at the Shakedown test in recent years. But he's a rookie, and let's give him time. Not all rookies come in and shine extremely bright at the very start of their MotoGP careers. They kind of become slow burners, but definitely, I think. The Honda was so bad about 2 years ago that even Ayagura, who had been raised through the kind of Honda school and had always ridden for like Honda kind of back teams, was unwilling to basically jump up to MotoGP as a rookie on the Honda. And I think now, as a rookie, that bike is certainly a lot more appealing. So I think Moreira will have the tools there to do something decent this season. But it might take a little longer than some of the top rookies that we've seen in recent years.
Also, keep an eye on the performance potential of the riders, because they've kind of joked that, Castro HRC haven't made their team presentation for this year yet. And they're already sort of clouding social media, outlets because of a rider they might sign for next year. But, if it's true and it's all confirmed with Fabio, then either Joan Mir or Luca Marini have to look for another job. And that's also going to influence the form that they're going to show in the first few races. I mean, would Joan Mir push even more and be hitting the floor even more? Or is he actually going to be showing that, the Honda, as Neil and David mentioned, is really kind of getting to the point where it has to be considered like a viable sort of conduit for success in MotoGP now?
Yeah, this was one of the things that myself and Dave talked about on the Patreon podcast about the silly season as well, because Honda will have to make their changes, and you could easily see a situation where it's Johan Zarco that ends up on the outside looking in, because Luca Marini could move to LCR. You could keep Joan Mir, pay him an awful lot less than you pay him now, put him on an incentive-based contract for bonuses, and see how that goes. But Neil, you were mentioning about standout rookies, and Dave's obviously he's been a bit harsh on Davi earlier on. I'm sure you can remember how much of a standout Davi was on his debut back in 2008.
Don't go there, Steve. We've only got like half an hour left.
He was on a Honda. He was on a Honda then.
I know, but just don't trouble Neil.
I'd be very surprised if Neil can tell me just how far behind the race leader he was as well.
He beat
that
Rossi.
Last lap overtake on Rossi. Wow, goodness me!
Something special, Neil.
Still lie up late at night thinking about that.
We'll move it on to KTM as well, because Dave, you'd mentioned KTM in your chat with Pit Buyer and what he had said over the course of the launch of the new project for this year. KTM, what can we expect from them? We've seen that during the Shakedown test that Calio's been out in the 850. They've been doing simulations without the ride height device and all these different things. So they're splitting their progress as well, like you'd expect for every other manufacturer.
Yes, I think one of the most revealing things from the KTM launch was Pedro Acosta. I mean, before we finish the podcast, I'd just like to ask you guys whether, if he is going to go to Ducati, is that really like a good move for him right now? I mean, what are sort of the main motivations behind it? You reckon? I mean, he's going from being number one billing with the current brand, a brand he's been with his entire career, and big sort of Red Bull athlete as well, all the kind of perks that come with that, to going into that kind of no man's land of being Marc Marquez's teammate, where he destroys all opposition, and going to maybe be a Monster Energy athlete. I don't know. I mean, he is literally jumping right out of his zone of comfort and I'm going back to my original point why I started talking, was that in the debrief he gave after the Red Bull KTM launch, he said that he was surprised and excited by the fact that he'd been to the factory, and KTM are in a different place compared to where they were 12 months ago, where they were kind of swimming in uncertainty with their future, not only for racing, but as a company. And he said that they've made progress, they've made changes, they've got some more interesting ideas for the RC16. So I think you have to be a bit more optimistic about how KTM could be in 2026. And perhaps it would be hugely ironic if Acosta starts winning races and goes on a hot streak. And he was a podium contender consistently for the last 4 to 5 Grand Prix last year. And if that sort of runs straight on again, then, he's going to be thinking, have I done the right thing if I'm leaving?
I would say one thing. Pedro was positive at the launch. So was Jorge Martin. So probably throw those things out with each other. For me, obviously, if Acosta wins on a KTM, he's given the credit for it. If he wins on a Ducati, he's not given any credit for that, because there's a list of riders that have been able to win on that bike. Very few that haven't been able to win on that bike, really. So when you look at it, there's not an awful lot that Acosta's reputation can gain by going to Ducati, but he'll be on the best bike on the grid. And you have to say that on the basis of what we've seen for the last 10 years, who are you backing to build the best bike on the grid? If you have the chance to be on that factory Ducati, you got to take it, because otherwise you can be like Quartararo, where everyone wants to just say that he stayed at Yamaha for money. And at least for Acosta, he's making the decision that performance and the potential to win is more important to him than earning the big money that he'd certainly get at KTM, because there's no way that Ducati will pay him anything near what he'd get everywhere else, because they don't have to. You can see that with how much they pay Mark. And if you pay Mark very little, you then have to pay his teammate very little. And then it's up to you to make it all on win bonuses. Mark's had good win bonuses, very good championship bonus, but you have to then perform. And I think for me, I like to see Acosta being hungry to go out there and try and put himself onto the best bike to win races, put himself up against Mark. And then we'll actually get a real answer as to how good Acosta is as well, because, he hasn't had that really at KTM where you're looking at it and thinking, who's really going to challenge him? He's outqualified Brad Binder every race of his MotoGP career. And then Vinales obviously had a strong start last year. Acosta's head was down. He wasn't looking very motivated for the first half of last year. And then Maverick gets injured. Acosta finds his form. That'll be interesting to see how it plays out this year. But I like if he were to move to Ducati, I like the move.
I think just to go back to what Ad was saying about the KTM presentation that we we didn't go there. It was an online affair, but we got the chance to speak to all 4 riders, plus the team managers of both the factory team Tech 3 and Pit Bauer as well. I mean, the general overall sense, I feel, was one of bullishness. I mean, Pit in particular was really, I felt, optimistic going into this season. Said it has been very much a normal winter. I think he was mentioning at one point that the weaknesses of last year's package, which, was kind of a lack of rear grip, which was really hurting Acosta right the way through the second part of the season. He was like, yeah, we've fixed them. We've addressed them. And yeah, you get the impression that they've been doing some work. Acosta, as Adam mentioned, has been impressed by the sheer number of parts that they've put together. And Pitt feels that there's a more coherent, clear plan for this test. And we hopefully won't be seeing a situation where, for the 4 different KTM riders are on 4 completely different packages through the first part of this year. It does seem like there is a lot more joined up thinking. I would add the caveat that KTM has been bullish in the past going into seasons, only to be found wanting. So, the fact that everyone's very optimistic is by no means a guarantee. But yeah, I started to get a little flicker of excitement, actually, because, if they can make a decent step, he was saying they want to basically be starting the season where they ended last, which is in the fight for the podium consistently. And there is a sense that, with KTM management at least, that Pedro can step up and maybe take the fight to Ducati. And I mean, that is something that I think everyone wants to see this year.
Yeah, the weakness of the KTM was the rear. They were using the rear tire too much, and they were
vibration.
And chatter, exactly, vibration. The chatter and the vibration is a lot about the mass dampers. They've been working with mass damper. They've got a season's worth of data now to work on that, which will really help. If they can, again, they sorted out some of the vibration issues, and then what you found was Pedro Acosta was really quick at the first start of the race, and then would just run out of tire because the KTM was too aggressive on the tires. They can fix that. There was a much more positive vibe, I think, like less they got through last winter by the skin of their teeth. Pet Byra said, well, because I said, well, I hope you had a good Christmas. He said, yes, thanks for asking about that, because I actually did get some sleep this Christmas, unlike last year, where they were just
off.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, where he was just trying last year. They were just trying to survive. They're not just trying to survive anymore. So there is a bit, and it is a very slimmed down operation. There is less budget, but it's much more focused and concentrated. And those sort of restrictions can force people to think about new things and think in new ways. So I'm quite sort of optimistic about it. You'd all better sit down, because I'm really looking forward to Maverick, to see what Maverick can do and to see how his working with Jorge Lorenzo works out. Maverick was fantastic at the beginning of last year. The one thing that we know was his biggest problem was consistency, and the sort of drills that he's been talking about, that he's been doing with Jorge Lorenzo, is working on all of his weaknesses, and that I think is really going to, like, for example, he was saying Lorenzo made him go out in the wet, and Maverick was fantastic when it was dry, and he was fantastic when it was fully wet, and the circumstances were predictable. But he hated that sort of like half and half stuff. And you so often you would see him really just go completely backwards in conditions like that. And if he can work on understanding those sort of details and the techniques of riding, then I think he can make a big step. And then it gets very interesting.
I think just sort of my final 2 cents on KTM, I think they're emerging as probably the most interesting manufacturer in MotoGP right now. Their title sponsor is the biggest non-endemic one in the paddock. They're in a position where Pit Byra in the next 4 weeks, and he said that this would be the time frame, and when he was speaking to us, not only has to confirm KTM's future with Dorna with the next 5-year contract window, but also secure the satellite team association with Tech3 that we know are under new management. They stand on the precipice of losing their generational talent, but then arguably they have another 2 or 3 contenders coming through their pipeline, which is still incredibly strong. I mean, we're not even referencing people like Colin Vaya, who could really emerge as one of the more unusual riders in terms of his sort of nationality, in the Premier class. And the motorcycle itself, they were one of the first to unveil their engine. They were one of the first to get a rolling chassis on the track. And, if like Neil said, some of their kind of very optimistic statements made only days and hours ago ring true, then you could see them pushing up again, not only to become sort of the second best manufacturer in MotoGP, like they've been for a few years up until 2025, but then maybe threaten some of that sort of, power that they've got in Borgo Panigale.
And this was just my impression from a conversation over Microsoft Teams, but Pedro was looking pretty buff. I mean, his shoulders looked like they had expanded by about 5 inches. And I asked him about this, and he sort of smiled and said that I think it was the crash at Phillip Island at the end of 2024, his rookie season, injured his left shoulder, and that had been a kind of consistent problem that he had felt. Wasn't so bad in the warm conditions, but when it got cold, he said that was something that really like hindered him throughout last year. So he felt that the winter was a kind of chance to basically help that heal a little bit, and then just kind of put on muscle afterwards. And yeah, he feels like he's now in a better position to kind of physically deal with the demands of a MotoGP machine, which potentially he has not quite been at in the past 2 years.
Yeah, that's an interesting point as well, Neil. And we'll move it on to Ducati as well to finish off. And Dave, when you look at Ducati, obviously we've seen it that they've had the bike on the grid that's been able to win the championship the last few years. There were issues last year, but we've seen it where there's an upgrade to the bike again for this year. I find it interesting that Adam mentioned that Gigi was talking about the GP26, because at the end of last year, Gigi was saying that this was always a media invention, that Ducati didn't name the bikes really, and we were
he didn't mention in GP26. That was my inference. But
I apologize then, Adam, because when they've put it in press releases, they've always actually named the bike as well. So it was interesting when Gigi's gone down that route. But when you look at it, Dave, the changes that they've made to the bike, are they going to do anything to help Pecco, or is Pecco just treading water for a year?
He's treading water for a year.
He's a man scorned now, Dave, potentially.
Yeah, exactly. And we'll be really looking forward to going to Aprilia and being on a different kind of a bike. From the pictures that we've seen, what we've seen is that and also from what Gigi Dall'Igna said at the launch, they've got a new ride height device. It's the last year of the ride height devices. This is their real sort of secret weapon. What Gigi Dall'Igna understood was that Michelin make an unbelievable rear tire and an acceptable front tire. So if you're going to go faster, the way that you go faster is corner exit and using the rear of the bike. Now, what it means that they've got a new ride height device, and this is also true. Looking at the pictures we've seen with the massive front aero on the new Ducati, which Pirro has been testing, they're going even more. They're going even more all in on corner exit. They're working against wheelie. They're trying to get as much drive out of the corner. And I mean, Danilo Petrucci called this the short blanket thing, where you get to choose whether you're going to have, like a cold chest or cold feet. And if you are concentrating on the rear of the bike, then you have to sacrifice something at the front end of the bike. Pecco Bagnaia really needs that front end confidence. He needs help from the rear, but he also needs confidence in the front to be able to break deep into the corner and turn the bike. And I don't think Gigi Dall'Igna and Ducati particularly care about that. They just want the bike to be, as you said, as fast as possible around the track. And as fast as possible around the track means getting off the corner faster, accelerating harder and earlier. We also saw the air. It looks like the air inlet's changed a little bit. Dall'Igna again said, we've made some change. We think we can get a little bit more power out of the engine, even though they're not allowed to change the engine. They can change the air intake. They can change the exhaust, change the character. So yeah, I think just based on photographs, which is the meagerest of all possible evidence, I think that Pecco is in real trouble.
I think this test is going to be really interesting, also just to see the kind of the condition of Marc. The first time on a MotoGP bike since that fateful day in Indonesia last September or early October anyway. And he was quite interesting during the factory Ducati presentation. I wasn't there, but Ad sent on the press conference after it, and he was saying that he's been riding, a Panigale around the Aspar circuit quite a lot recently. And he said, over one lap or one day even, he's pretty competitive and he's pretty fast, but it was more just the endurance that is still a bit of an issue, and he is gradually building that up. So we could see a situation where Marc really does try and pace himself across the 3 days. Obviously, we're going to be testing in very, very punishing conditions. He didn't seem too bothered that he'll be at the first round at 100%. He's pretty sure of that. But we might not see a fully firing Marc here, and I think it's going to be interesting just to see how he kind of measures his progress over the 3 days.
Also, when we did the show recently, mentioning our fantasy kind of factory lineups for the future, there were a few comments that we hadn't mentioned the 2025 runner-up in the championship, Alex Marquez. And of course, he's now sort of been upgraded to sort of full factory status when it comes to his GP, whatever. So then I think it's worth keeping an eye on Alex as well. I wouldn't be surprised at all if he's very near the top of the time screens. As we know, Sepang is one of his favorite tracks, and he produced the season of his career in 2025. So what kind of equipment does Alex have, Dave? I guess we'll be relying on your BDIs to find that one out. So again, worth checking in on Patreon to get those daily updates from Dave. But watch Alex Marquez. I really would not be surprised at all if he ends up P1 after this sort of first official test of the year.
Yeah, this is his circuit as well, isn't it? I mean, winner here, last November or last October, sorry.
Moto2 World Championship even.
Yep, podium as well, I think a couple of years ago as well. So, yeah, Alex is great at Sepang. Yeah,
and we saw at Valencia that he was given the 2026 aero, or the prototype aero, to test as well. So they are giving him the parts. They basically rolled a full GP25 into his garage and gave him the test parts that Pecco Bagnaia was using. So yeah, that's going to be interesting, and that, I think, this becomes the real test of Alex Marquez. Yes, he was really fast when all he had to do was work on setup. Now he's not just going to have to work on setup. He's going to have to work on developing the bike, choosing parts, all the rest of it. He's going to have less time to work on setup because he's going to have more to. He's going to have
He
to spend
can,
more
Dave, because there's barely going to be anything new anyway. I don't want to dampen your Sepang test experience, but that's the reality of it. And also, let's also mention that he's only got half a pit box presence there because his teammate Firmino Alguer, of course, recovering from that broken femur. And I think we're still waiting from Grassini for an update on his sort of recovery period. But can we look at maybe is Jerez too soon, perhaps?
No, I think I saw something in the Catalan press this week actually, in which his physio says that they are still aiming and hopeful of appearing at the first race in Thailand.
Well, I think that's
very optimistic.
Yeah, I think that's going to be optimistic. He's also not going to be ideal. And I really think, just to come back briefly to the silly season, for me now, at the end of last year, you'd say, he's like one of the really big hot targets. Now, if he's missing the first part of the season, which is going to be so crucial to identifying because everything is moving so quickly, you need to be fast straight out of the gate right away. And I think it's going to be really, really difficult for Aldeguer to. I think that's going to harm his chances. If he'd have been fit all through the preseason, maybe he would have had a shot at a better ride.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point to make. And obviously, we're now getting ready for that Sepang test. But Adam, just to close it off, what's the one thing you're looking forward to most for the test?
Most from the test. Goodness. I'm not sure. I mean, unfortunately, we've had moments of drama in the last few years. Somebody's sort of gone down the road, whether it's Digia trying to pull a wheelie and then obviously Spanner in his preseason. So I do hope we don't really get anything too sensational. I don't think there'll be any great surprises with the lap times, and don't read too much into them, as we kind of previously hinted. But other than that, I'll be able to absorb Dave's energy from the other side of the world because I can feel it already on this call. So enjoy it, my friend.
You mentioned surprises, Ed. Jack Miller has just gone fastest at the end of day 2 of the Shakedown test, which it's quite surprising and quite impressive. He's already lapping in the 57s, which I think is probably a little ahead of what we would have expected. But again, let's not get too excited about that. I mean, the one thing I'm really excited about is KTM, just to see if this sort of optimism that we witnessed during their team presentation is actually going to materialize on the track, because they've always been so difficult to read at the Sepang test in recent years, usually because they're testing so many things, and you almost get the impression that it's been a bit overwhelming for the riders at times, that they don't really have a clear idea of what the package will be. But yeah, if you could see a kind of KTM consistently up towards the front, then I think that bodes well for the year. But yeah, I'll be keeping a close eye on the orange bikes, I think, more than anyone else.
And Dave,
what are you looking forward to?
Well, I'm looking forward to going to it. Yeah, exactly. I'm looking forward to going to a test. I mean, I'm really looking forward to seeing Toprak properly with some time on the bike under his belt, a chance to really understand the bike. I think for me, he's the most interesting prospect. I'm looking forward to seeing what they're doing at Yamaha, because they have so much work ahead of them that it's going to be it's going to be crucial to understand, what's going on. Again, interesting to see what Ducati have come up with, and to hear the comments of the riders on where Ducati are going. Also, Pecco Bagnaia. I'm also interested to hear what all the riders have got to say, because all of them know that their contracts are up. There'll be a lot of riders. Nobody's going to be able to say, yes, I'm really looking forward to riding the Honda next year or whatever. But they're all going to be a little bit more open. Pecco Bagnaia, if he knows he's going to be out of the door next year, he's going to be a lot more open in his comments about Ducati than he would be otherwise. So I'm looking forward to sort of needling people and seeing what we can get out of them.
Push him to say F you, GG. Push him, Dave. You've done it before.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. Yeah. Perhaps we should have a bet on who I can make cry this year.
Steve, just before we finish the podcast, I want to mention that we launched a merchandise line, and it's now active. Dave, where can it be found?
It can be found at paddockpasspodcast.com/shop. and that will take you to our shop. We are looking at expanding one or two things, so keep an eye on that.
But there is a but.
There is a but. It's US based. If you're in the US,
yes,
it's
thanks to Uncle Donald and his infinite wisdom. It's probably only mainly beneficial for US based fans or customers. If you're in Europe or Australia or anywhere else, then just hang on for a moment because the shipping charges are a little bit extortionate.
Or just buy a lot of merch, and then the shipping charges are really, really worth it.
We're looking to fix it, but if you're American based, then you can get your merch in. So please go and grab that. And the other thing I want to give a shout out is to two of our Patreons have launched their own podcast. And TV Room Raccoon and Daksha, if you go to YouTube and search, I think it's Motor Girly Pod, then they're launching their own kind of broadcast, which is incredibly interesting. Damn it. And it could potentially be sort of a very nice offshoot. So if you're looking for some more MotoGP perspective, then look for Motor Girly Pod.
Girly Pop, I think it is, with a
Girly
P.
Pop. Oh, right, okay.
Yeah, Moto Girly Pops. To give it its full title. Yeah, and now we're going to have to look at both of them as competitors.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
but
I don't know. Like the raccoon is our official statistician on the
that is true.
Paddock Pass podcast. So I'm still saying teammate, but obviously on Patreon we're very busy as well. We've got a lot of content over the course of January. That's only going to build over the next couple of months. We've also got a competition coming up for Paddock Passes. We've done this the last few years, and it'll be for the MotoGP or World Superbike round of your choice. If anyone opts for the Superbike round, there's a few extra goodies that can be thrown into that, like getting onto the grid and different things. So keep your eye on Patreon for that. And we're going to launch that competition in the next couple of days. But you'll need to be an annual subscriber as a Paddock Insider. And for that, you're able to get access to all of our Paddock Note shows and our extra content. The other options as well are to be a Paddock Expert or a VIP, where you'll get calls with us as well. And you're able to get some additional merchandise as a VIP. So check that out on patreon.com/Paddock Pass podcast, and keep your eyes on that as well for our test roundup shows, Paddock Note shows from Sepang.